moments or scenes or phrases or images that resonated particularly strongly for you. There are no right or wrong answers. Some of you have been through the drill before, but yeah, if there's anything that really stood out. Okay, well, what about the different themes of the play? What did you feel was the overall story was really about? Yes?
I thought it was about relationships. Relationships between grandfather, granddaughter, mother, daughter, husband, wife. Relationships.
Okay. Were there different aspects of relationships that you felt the play kind of illuminated for you, or?
Well, I thought the saddest one actually was between the father and his daughter. It's understandable, but it's really sad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard situation to be in. And so yeah, to read about it, to read it the first time, and to read about the SIPA disorder, and that it's not something that's made up. I mean, it is a real disorder that people have, and so the way that the play does sort of talks about it clinically, but also makes it really real. It shows sort of the human side of it, and how it affects other people around them also. Relationships. So. Others? Yes.
I thought it was about actions have consequences, and in this case, transgeneration. The original relationship between the surgeon and his wife, and things that did or didn't happen, are now 3 generations present. And so I thought it was pretty powerful for the granddaughter to return, and that for me was what I take away.
Yeah, the different ways that the actions and consequences impact the relationships as well. That it's kind of nice to what she was saying as well. Yeah, yeah. Others? I know it's kind of a small audience tonight, so I don't want anyone to feel like you're being put on the spot.
Yeah, but
Well, and you all can also respond. I mean, we had about 9 hours of rehearsal, and so we talked a lot about what was happening in the script itself, but I don't know if you guys have any feelings or opinions about things within the script that we didn't talk about, or that don't have anything to do with your character necessarily.
Well, one of the things we talked about, if you're familiar with that, which we thought was interesting, the show Law and Order, how it can start off one way and then sort of shift another. And did anyone, what was your impression of grandfather and the granddaughter? Again, do you understand that relationship? When they were on the computer, the very first opening scenes, what did you think their relationship was when they were talking on the computer?
I'm not sure, but at intermission, we went to the bathroom and said, "Is he a child molester?"
Was that awkward?
Do you think he is? Yeah, no.
But so did you find the first act creepy? Then, or wondering, or
Maybe there was more to the story. I was reading to decide.
you didn't pass judgment. You wanted to like.
There must be something else.
The thing I like about this play, and I like this play a lot, by the way, to oversimplify it, I suppose, the basic difference between a children's story and an adult story is that in a children's story, they get married and they live happily ever after. In an adult story, they deal with the relationships that are never perfect and are always going back and forth. And this play is about all of these relationships with these people and all of these relationships are damaged one way or another. And they all try in whatever way they can to just sort of make it as right as they can. And you were right. Every story interplays with every other story, everybody has to live with the consequences of what they've done. And everybody, I think there's a lot of attempt here to reach out. I mean, my character, who has screwed up so many things, is really trying to reach out to a bunch of people. And I'm also kind of struck with the tenderness of the relationship between them as well, and how she is doing something which would normally be just horrible, and yet it's understandable. It tears at him, but he still knows why she does it. And you can see in the play that they do genuinely love each other. But they have to do what they have to do.
Yeah, we talked about the whole theme of pain, and really every character has their own kind of pain, whether it's physical, emotional, both, and things that we do to anesthetize that pain. So very literally, Percocet, whatever, but also in terms of different kinds of behaviors. And all of us have pain. And it's so interesting that the playwright picked this disorder where this child does not feel pain. What are the ramifications of that? Do we really want that, not feeling pain? That has its own problems as well. So
Yeah, so I guess the idea that pain is part of life, I mean, whether you experience it or not directly, I mean, it's a part of life, it still impacts you and the people around you.
love and pain walk together.
Right, you gotta have one without the other. I don't know what that says about me. Yes,
The granddaughter's named Maddie, right?
yes.
Okay. The whole idea of Maddie wanting to be independent and kind of isolate herself from like the rest of the family and people, that was a really strong thing. But underlying, there's a lot of like reliance when it came to relationships. Like for example, a surgeon that would never befriend like a patient, and a detective that would never befriend someone that's a suspect. But at the end, that was a relationship that kind of saved him from going to jail. And there was a lot of these relationships on people that relied on each other, and it was a lot closer of a circle than it actually seems from the outside. And I thought that was kind of a contrast, and I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, cool point. Yeah, that is interesting.
Sort of improbable parents.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that dynamic also is sort of played out and explored in some ways. The relationship between Nancy and Maddie, that they both are so dependent on each other, and not at the same time that they both want to get away from each other. And I think Nancy does, even though it's not directly expressed, but that being so connected and relying on, I mean, and I guess it is more, it's more typical that the daughter's relying on the mother, but the mother's really relying on the daughter for her connection to the world, as well as the daughter being so isolated, and so she's forced to rely on her mother, but she reaches out elsewhere. But so yeah, there were a couple of things that we talked about in rehearsal about moments that seemed less plausible to us, or that we questioned how plausible it was or wasn't, and kind of came up with certain explanations for, that's how that works. But the idea of people who would normally be, enemies or wouldn't be connected in any positive sense, that end up being sort of the lifelines for each other, is what you're saying, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting how with that, like the people who normally should be, family members who should be connecting with each other don't. They want to be as far away from each other as possible. I mean, in different ways. Grace even in some ways needs to get away from the pain that's going on with Frederick and needs to have that release. And my character needs to get away from his daughter sometimes and his wife because there's so much going on there. So it's really interesting how the people that one would think you would connect to and trust most, these characters just want to push away from them, just want to get away from them as much as possible.
and a lot of the behaviors that happen. I sort of felt a lot of universality. I don't know personally any doctors who, you know, spent so much time trying to gain the respect and the adoration of strangers that they ended up estranged from their own families. But I know actors who've done it. You know, so
Actors who play doctors?
yes. And so it's there's another a level of universality there, that it's not, you know, it's not only one group of people that does this to one another. We all have a tendency in some way.
Well, right, and yeah, the people who, again, we do find more comfort connecting outside of that circle of the people who are supposed to be closest and most reliant on it, that it's easier to connect with people outside the family, the immediate family circle. And whether it's because it gives them a credibility that, you know, so your family can be like, oh, so dismissive of you, little spaghetti, but out in the world, you can be someone really important, and so need that validation elsewhere that you can't find from the home, from the family. In that sense, that is, I think, plays out for each of the characters in different ways. And, you know, that even Bruce is kind of seeking a deeper connection with Grace, and he's being held at arm's length. Yes.
A couple of things occur to me. I think we see the weakness of the Western model of family. I think if these characters had more support, a broader community support, they might have had more choice. But the fact that we have a nuclear family and we find families so narrowly, it actually really interferes with potential for a broader community which could be more supportive of men. And so I always kind of don't want to say universal, because a lot of other cultures have very different perspective on what families are. The other thing, well, two other things that struck me. I thought it was very powerful at the end when a police officer could say his daughter repulsed him. You know, that's transgression. You're supposed to be perfect. Your child is no matter what. And if you can't speak the truth, I think the surgeon gave him a chance, a person who he could absolutely be unvarnished with. She repulses me sometimes. I think that's really important for him to be able to do that. Maybe it gives him an introduction, kind of a doorway to get back in touch with his wife. I thought the surgeon also could mention him in the consequences of withdrawing, because he's been there. He's lived it. It's not theoretical. I think the other thing that just was lightly touched on, but was very interesting, were the two people who were not quite good enough. I read about the Gladwell. He talks about what talent really is and what it isn't. And he said it's hard work. It's not like God has touched you and you are out there because you're that special. It's like you may have a talent, but if you don't grow that talent. And these two people were, he was being, your characters just being responsible, being reasonable, being rational. You got to earn a living, be a man. So you can't really pursue singing, which is really what you want to do. Your character, I thought, was very powerful when you confront your father. And it isn't the parents' place to necessarily tell somebody, well, I'm sorry, you know, let's face it, you're not good enough. Because the impact of a father saying that, a parent saying that to a child, is devastating.
Well, and especially considering that it's not even like he's a concert master or, you know, that it's not his field. It would be one thing if he said, I don't think you're cut out to be a surgeon, you know, where that's his field of expertise. But yeah, well, you're good, and we come from a family of cellists, obviously. The great-great-grandmother, the great-grand, you know, that they've all, for generations, we played cello, but you, honey, you're accomplished, but not good enough. Yeah.
And the tragic thing is then I feel like Nancy also perpetuates that onto Maddie, because even though Maddie is successful and does have all these albums and is making the money, it's like it's never good enough. It's always like there's odd pauses or like what are you doing, and so she's just kind of recycling that trauma onto her daughter, which will just perpetuate kind of what you're saying with it.
Well, right, or even if you want to learn how to ice skate, I mean, you need to be a cellist because it is the family legacy. And so if maybe if I wasn't good enough, then you need to know, you need to keep practicing, keep practicing. And, you know, no, I don't hear any mistakes, but you still need to play through again before we discuss your paper on South Africa.
That's a nightmare parenting scenario.
Yeah.
Any other responses or reflections that people want to share about the plan? Yes.
I think it's interesting that at the very end, when Frederick says, you know, I've changed, and then you realize that the change came through pain. So in a sense, the pain was also a comfort. It was something that could also soothe relationships, even though at the same time it still hurts to go through that soothing process. And I think it was reinforced again through Detective Mike. In regards to your daughter and how it spit off, and finally realizing the fact that she did not want to go home until you could turn off the lights, and very lovingly as father would stroke her hair and be with her. And that kind of pain has got to be absolutely extraordinary in somebody's life, just doing that to comfort somebody at the same time while they're fighting their own emotions in regards to physical pain as well as the visual pain of seeing someone that they love, just more or less in that state. I think the title is brilliant because it peels back like an onion, the anatomy of pain in the body. Kind of opened my eyes tonight. And the same with the daughter of the surgeon, Nancy. The pain that you haven't been going through. You don't want to kick Maddie's asshole off on yourself. You're really keeping your own ass, I think.
Yeah.
Trying to get some control in your own life.
Trying to make right what went wrong in life.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. And we talked about the pain of expectations, which I mean, like the difference between how you think something's going to be and the way it is. So everybody had something in their life that was not what they expected it to be, and how you kind of deal with it or adjust to it, or you don't adjust to it. So I love Frederick's the surgeon's line about the baseline of tolerable agony. Yes, it's like a cornerstone concept.
Yeah.
It's not causing any further damage. It just is what it is, and it's tolerable.
Yeah.
You can still do what you need to do.
Well, and yeah, I mean, that question, though, of chronic pain versus acute pain, and that when you live with chronic pain, there's a baseline of what's tolerable. What the baseline of his tolerable agony might be intolerable for Nancy, you know, or might be nothing, you know, and so the conversation that he has with Michael about, oh, well, yeah, imagining the puppies licking your spine, it doesn't work so well for chronic pain, but for acute pain, yeah, the different ways that we distract ourselves or not, and so how things can accumulate and we become more used to it, and so then it's not until it builds up even more that then it's, oh, no, now it's back to my baseline of tolerable, but that still doesn't mean it's back to zero. Yeah. So the way that things can accumulate, build up, and what we do survive with, continuing to carry, that we sometimes we either become unaware of or in denial of because we need to continue going or doing other things, and so it's, you know, ignore that monkey on my back. I have to keep going. So I think it's quite, yeah, it kind of explores that in some interesting ways as well. But yeah, the question of the physical, emotional, and intellectual, you know, that when I first read the play, and I had said this to the actors in rehearsal, but that I was really kind of struck by thinking, like, I felt like Frederick represented the intellectual, that he was so used to interacting with the world in an intellectual way as a surgeon, and that was his comfort zone. And so then being really challenged physically and with the pain, that was what kind of stopped him. And that Maddie's in a place where she relates to the world really emotionally. And that the music is also a way of expressing that
Were there any notes from Mia that talked about why she chose the Maddie to play the cello versus another kind of instrument? Because I find it to be such a haunting instrument to begin with. But I'm just curious, that's all.
Yeah, no, she didn't include any notes on that, but I can ask her. But I suspect that that is the reason why, that she chose it, but I can find out. But I don't have an answer.
Yeah, including the actual music would put a,
Would add a different level.
yeah, it would put a whole different term.
Well, if there's nothing else that anyone